I'm Joy Lynn Blake, and I'm the director of School Academy, and I'm so delighted to be with you all this evening. I have looked forward to our time. This lovely lady, my friend Kim Farley, and these brilliant gentlemen who will be joining us this evening to give us their insights into higher ed and liberal arts education and whatever other insights they may have to offer. And thank you to all you School A families who are joining us, and friends. If you're friends of a School A family and you just decided to hop on this evening, we're so glad that you're with us. I'm going to share just our evening's agenda, which is uncomplex. It will involve three simple things. We're going to meet the panelists and hear from them. Then we're going to hear from their perspectives on some pre-written questions that we thought were popular and that would pique your curiosity. And then the second half of the evening will be given to answering your questions, the practicalities, because we know you families have some burning questions about higher ed and a whole array. I even had a student email me just this evening, tell me about dual credit, and does that help or hurt my chances? So there will be a time at the end of the evening where you'll be able to present your questions. But before we get started, I definitely want to say a special thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for you and your institutions are great supporters of us here at School Academy and at Classical Academic Press. And likewise, we are great fans and supporters of you and what you do. So thank you for taking the time this evening to join us. I'm going to give you all a more concrete opportunity to introduce yourself, because it will be an important segue for you to also introduce where you come from and the institutions you represent. But before I hand it off to you all, I wanted to alert all our families to where you can find more information, okay? So I'm going to share my screen here and you'll be able to see about meeting our panelists. The goodness and the richness doesn't have to stop here, friends. If you go to scholaacademy.com and do /events, what you will find is this particular document. So let me stop sharing this, and then I'm going to share a document that we created that some of you have already seen in your emails and so on and so forth. But I want to draw your attention because you may or may not have taken the opportunity to actually scroll through not only those bios that they have provided, but also videos from their respective institution or videos that they have made particularly for us. So let me draw your attention there. And so if you don't get to know them quite as deeply or as thoroughly as you'd like this evening, this document, friends, will come in handy. Okay, so again, you go to scholaacademy.com/events and you will meet there Dr. Diener from Hildegard College. You'll learn all about the fact that he's the assistant professor of education at Hillsdale, and then you can even watch a video that Dr. Diener has recorded for us. Then you'll scoot on down and meet Dr. Phil Donnelly. He's at Baylor in my home state of Texas, and you can learn about his role as the professor of literature of the Great Text program in the Honors College at Baylor. And then you can learn more about the Honors College. Here, just click on that link and you can learn those videos. Dr. Chris Franklin is professor of philosophy and humanities at Grove City College in PA. Pennsylvania is where our home offices are. And you can watch a video about why would you choose Grove City. And Matthew Smith, Dr. Smith, is founding president of Hildegard College, and great innovative ideas there in Southern California. And you can learn more about that with this link, introducing Hildegard College. And last, but certainly not least, as I said, my friend Kim Farley, she represents the classic learning test and specifically the homeschooling segment. She serves homeschooling families, and I've heard her on podcasts and other such glorious things. So she's got a great wealth of information to share with us all this evening. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand it off to our panelists, and what I figured they could do is introduce themselves to us but I figured the way to go about doing that may be best done geographically. So what do I mean by that, friends? Well, let me show you. We could have done this alphabetically, but I thought, why not increase our geographic awareness here? So we will start on the far west coast with Hildegard College. So we'll hear from Dr. Smith first, and then he will take 4 or 5 minutes, introduce himself and his college. Then he will hand the baton to Dr. Donnelly here at Baylor. And then Dr. Donnelly will throw that baton up to Dr. Diener at Hillsdale College. And then Dr. Diener will hand it off finally to Dr. Franklin at Grove City. And when you are awed and astounded by the opportunities here, and then equally intimidated by, oh, but do we have what it takes to get into such fine universities and colleges? Then Kim Farley is here to reassure you, both as someone who moderates a CLT exam, who advocates for that, and someone who is a homeschooling mother herself and has had her own children enter Christian liberal arts colleges. So that is the plan for the first half of the evening. And so now I'm going to hand it to Hildegard there, and you, Dr. Smith, take it away. Tell us all about you and your university. We're losing your audio there, Dr. Smith. Let's try.
Okay, how about now?
Yep, perfect.
I like the addition of that map. That's fun to see. We're obviously much further west than the rest of you all. But thank you, Joylyn, for having me on here, and I'm privileged to be joining colleagues from schools that I admire. So happy to be on the Scholé Academy College Night once again. My name's Matthew Smith. I'm founding president of Hildegard College, and I guess if we happen to be moving geographically, we're also beginning with a school that's probably the least like the others. Not only because we're an alternative sort of college, but because we're brand new. So our inaugural freshman class is about 8 weeks into their first semester, pushing their way through great texts and classical logic, classical geometry, and entrepreneurial thought. So that's what we're studying right now. Hildegard College is in Costa Mesa, California, which is in Orange County, California, about 4 miles from the ocean or so in Newport Beach. We are a brand new school founded essentially with the conviction that higher education as a whole is not working. And we think a reboot makes more sense than just sort of a reform from within to do the sort of thing that we want to do. So we're an independent, small, radically affordable, ecumenical Christian college, meaning non-denominational Christian college, that is really designed to do one thing, which is to form a particular kind of high impact, virtuous young adult by forming them through a set of 6 abiding and relevant questions that we think have always mattered and that continue to matter. And then by training them in entrepreneurial thought so they could do things about them. So these questions are questions like, is there a God? And if there is a God, what is God like? Is human nature real? How do we access knowledge of the world? How does language play into that? What does it mean for somebody to be free? Questions like this, what's the best way to understand those questions? Well, by reading the greatest thinkers on those questions. And so our program leads to a single degree in liberal arts and entrepreneurship, 2 things that universities tend to push to opposite sides of their institutions. We actually think are essentially the same thing. Learning how to do something by learning how to build it, entrepreneurship, and studying the history of ideas by going to the source itself. Where were the ideas built? The study of great works. So that's our degree at Hildegard College. Other maybe salient details about us is that we are a Christian college for all students, respecting students from all Christian traditions. We're committed to free inquiry in the classroom. All of our courses are taught through seminar, Socratic seminar. We administer 0 tests, that is, examinations, fill in the blank or multiple choice examinations. All evaluation is done through projects, through oral examinations, through presentations, and through papers. And in our entrepreneurship courses, students are evaluated, their learning is evaluated by the work they do for real organizations. So instead of learning, for instance, how to, I don't know, make a social media campaign and then being tested on, do you know how to make a social media campaign? They actually are paired with an organization they apprentice with and then create a social media campaign. We talk to the organization and determine if the student has done a good job. So by the time students graduate, they not only can say, I've passed these tests and I've gotten these grades on these papers, but I've actually led these initiatives and done these things for these real organizations. So institutionally, we are different in that regard, and that we're closing the gap between college and life after college. So that's Hildegard College. Happy to talk to anybody who's interested. You can go to our website and sign up for our kind of updates and newsletter, or you can email admissions@hildegard.college, admissions@hildegard.college. I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Donnelly.
There, thank you. As was mentioned, my name is Philip Donnelly. I teach in the Great Text program at Baylor University in the Honors College specifically. The Honors College at Baylor provides a unique combination of scholarly apprenticeship and Christian community that I think you'll find not really anywhere else in American higher education, or even the world for that matter. Now, you might find yourself thinking, is Baylor really that unique? And as it happens, I've had to answer that question several times over the course of 20 years, raising my 3 children who've each at a different point in their life have realized that their entire extended family is in Canada and they live in Texas. And they've had to ask me, Dad, why are we here? Right. And so I've had to explain to them why, in fact, Baylor is really unique in the world. And what makes the way to put it together would be to say that on the one hand, there are places where you can get a good Christian liberal arts education. And on the other hand, there are many places where you can get an education at a comprehensive research university that gives you an apprenticeship in the highest levels of intellectual inquiry across the whole range of disciplines. What makes Baylor distinctive, I think, is that it's the only place that I know where I found that you can combine these two things. As a comprehensive research university, it provides an apprenticeship in research with world-class scholars at the highest levels, and at the same time, the Honors College provides you with formational benefits of a Christian liberal arts education. So if you want to have the personal benefits of a liberal arts education in the context of a caring Christian community, as well as the kind of professional apprenticeship opportunities provided by a comprehensive research university, then I think you should consider Baylor. And the element of Christian community, it turns out, is crucial. Based on my experience working with students for over 20 years, I can say that if you live in the Honors Residential College, which is the residence associated with the Honors College, you will meet, in fact, people who will be friends for the rest of your life. That's the character of the students who've come to the Honors College. At the same time, you can be apprenticed by scholars, first-rate scholars in a range of disciplines, whether the physical sciences or engineering or the fine arts or the humanities. Of course, the Great Text program inside the Honors College actually provides a key intellectual core for everything else, because as it happens, in real life, questions about knowledge, questions about enjoyment, and questions about how people live are, in fact, in practice, inseparable. So in contrast to most modern academic disciplines that separate questions of truth from questions of beauty and goodness, in the Great Text program, we allow students to actually ask the questions that cross the divisions between what we know, what we enjoy, and how we live. The final point that I would, bring to your attention is that some of you might be thinking, Baylor sounds great, but I could never afford it. I think when I was starting looking at colleges, that would be my assumption, in fact. And my advice is this: don't assume that you can't afford to come to Baylor. I would encourage you to do two things. First, as you go through the application process, first, find out how much your tuition costs can be reduced by scholarship funding on the basis of your academic profile. Secondly, be sure to apply to one of the programs inside the Honors College. So the college has actually 4 programs inside it. If you're in any one of those programs, you're eligible for additional scholarship funding. So remember that one of your tasks as a Christian is to listen for and discern God's voice, and then to step out in faith in response to what God's called you to do. As George Mueller famously said, God's work done in God's way and God's time will not be found lacking God's resources. So I'm not saying that you should be rash or presumptuous, but if you're seeking to respond to God's call in your life, don't presume that anything is impossible. Thank you. I'll hand it off now to Dr. Diener.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Phil. So I am David Diener. I am up here in the north in southern Michigan at Hillsdale College. So a couple of things that make Hillsdale unique, and then I'll mention a couple things and then turn to the programs that we offer and some of the distinctives specifically with regard to education. So one of the things that makes Hillsdale unique is that we are fiercely committed to doing education without interference from the government. So along with Grove City, back in the 80s, there was a famous case that went the whole way to the Supreme Court, and Hillsdale is committed to being independent. That means that we don't receive any federal funds. We do not accept a penny of money from the government. So all of the scholarships that are offered and everything is self-funded by people who believe in the mission of the college. We also have an education department that doesn't certify teachers. So this is another aspect of this. The education department at Hillsdale College, of which I'm now a part, used to have a typical teacher preparation program. And at some point, the requirements from the state became so onerous and so out of line philosophically with a historical liberal arts approach to education that the college decided to forego that. And and some people said, well, that's a death knell. How can you have an education department if you're not certifying teachers? As far as I know, we're the only college that has a fully functioning staffed education department with no education major. What we have, though, is a thriving classical education minor. So it is a minor program that is explicitly classical. Our education department is explicitly classical. And so students can go through that series of courses. And what this means is that undergraduate students who go through Hillsdale College have a major in math or philosophy or biochemistry or whatever the case may be, right? And if they are interested in continuing to learn about the classical liberal arts tradition, they can take courses from within the education department, and they can take the minor in addition to their major. And every year, about 15% of Hillsdale College graduates go on to work in classical schools. They get teaching jobs. So Hillsdale College is a unique institution in that, in addition to having all the liberal arts college programs, we're also deeply invested in K-12 education. That goes the whole way back to 1990 when the college founded a classical Christian school right here on our campus, Hillsdale Academy. I was the headmaster of Hillsdale Academy before I moved over full-time into the professor role when I first came to Hillsdale. And that's a school that serves local families, and then also has had a national presence for many, many years, as well as the K-12 office that is doing outreach to the K-12 classical education space. So all this to say, this is a college that is deeply committed to the kind of education that Scholé and Classical Academic Press have been working in for many years. And the college has shown its commitment to that style of education, even when it's required some difficult decisions at times. So we have a classical education program within the education department. We also have a master's degree program within the education department. So this program is a newer program. It's a 2-year residential master's program that's fully funded. So if people are accepted into it, it's tuition free. And there's a stipend that's involved with a graduate research assistantship. And we're getting ready to launch a hybrid online version of that master's program also to, again, help serve classical school educators, teachers, administrators all over the country and the world who want to continue growing in this approach to education. So those are a couple of the programs we offer. Like my colleague Dr. Donnelly said, I would say explore the financial aid options. Hillsdale is a small school. It's a wonderful community, and there are many scholarship options available. The one other thing about Hillsdale that makes it unique is that, because in part this is due to the independence, that allows us to form community in ways that for many years, centuries, colleges had, but now because of laws, you can't. So for example, we have very open communication and relationships with our students' parents. This weekend, in fact, we have Parents Weekend. So starting tonight and tomorrow, parents are going to be coming into town. And on Saturday, we have essentially parent-teacher conferences, right? Where we set up in this huge indoor track facility at tables, and the parents in 10-minute intervals go around and talk to their children's professors. And we talk about what we're teaching and learning together and how their students are doing and those kinds of things. So it's a really wonderful community to be a part of for students and also for parents as well. So again, Hillsdale College, those are a few of the programs we offer. You can look up at hillsdale.edu, many of the other, to look at all the majors and minors and different programs that are available. Small liberal arts, ecumenical, non-sectarian Christian college in Southern Michigan. I'll pass the baton now across over to Pennsylvania to Dr. Franklin.
Good evening, all. It's great to be with you. I'm very honored to be joining the fellow panelists and to be discussing with you and hopefully giving you guys some helpful perspectives as you make this decision about where best to go. So I'm a professor at Grove City College. It's located here in Western Pennsylvania, where I've been for 10 years. My wife of almost 20 years and I homeschool our 4 children. So we're quite sympathetic with you all and think of ourselves as kindred spirit. To what you guys are up with your children as well. My teaching interests are in philosophical anthropology, so I think a whole lot about the nature of virtue and virtue formation and wisdom. Of late, I've been particularly interested in the role of imagination and stories in developing virtue and imparting wisdom, so I spend a lot of time both teaching and thinking about those issues. As Joylyn pointed out earlier, there's a link you can click that will bring you a lot of information about Grove City if you're interested. So I thought what I would do, rather than talking about some of that information, is maybe pull back the veil a bit and show you a little bit of what Grove City might look like on the ground. So if I had to emphasize a couple of things to you, or what I would really want people to know, if you're to know anything about Grove City College, what would I want you to know? Well, I'd want you to know, first and foremost, we believe in what we call Christ-centered education. And I just want to highlight a few ways in which we try to achieve that Christ-centered education. So first, we believe that the greatest impact at our school on students who come here are faculty, and not just what faculty say in the classroom, but the kind of people faculty are, what they say, as it were, between the lines. And so in the process of hiring, we're very serious not only to finding top class scholars in their field, but also finding men and women who are committed to discipleship to Jesus. A second way in which we pursue Christ-centered education is in classroom integration. So whatever classroom you're in, whether it's chemistry or accounting or philosophy, from the get-go, we're thinking about the nature of that discipline and how best to do it from a perspective of biblical revelation. It's not something that's added in. It's not something that we take lightly. It's something that we try to take very seriously in our scholarship and in our teaching. The third way you might see this at Grove City is in student life. Now, this comes out many ways in student life. In student life, we have a traditional chapel program where hundreds of students gather on Wednesday mornings to worship and to learn from the word. But we also have a lot of interesting programs. So, for example, we have something on Fridays called Formation Friday that takes place from 11 to noon. And this is a much more intimate, discipleship-centered approach in which administrators and faculty will meet usually with, say, 10 to 15 students, and they do a variety of things. They might read Augustine's Confessions together. They might think about ancient spiritual practices of Lectio Divina or silence and solitude, or they might get together with a biology professor and go out in nature and experience God's glory. So it's really central to us as we think about education at Grove City, that at the center of it is Christ. The second thing I'd really want to say about our education here is that we really see ourselves as wanting to partner with you and continue the kind of education you've been seeking to give your kids, right? Whatever you've been up to for these last 12 plus years. And in a couple of ways we seek to do this is everyone at Grove City has to take 6 liberal arts courses that will take them into biblical studies, literature, the fine arts, philosophy, history, regardless of what their major in. This is what we call our humanities core curriculum that connects with all our students, and also giving them an opportunity to pursue professional majors. So for example, right now I've got an accounting and philosophy double major. She wants to be accounting, but she loves philosophy and she loves to see the way in which those combine. So here at Grove City, we very much hope to continue to pursue the liberal arts education you've been trying and seeking to give your children, while also giving them a variety of venues to pursue perhaps more professional majors. The last thing I'd want to say that, again, might be harder just to see from the website is what a rich on-campus community we have here at Grove City. About 95% of our students live on campus. There's wonderful clubs going on, from ballroom dancing to chess, to movie clubs, to book clubs, to apologetics, to ministries, all kinds of wonderful things. Also, Grove City's housed in a very small town, relatively speaking. We're just about 6,000 people here in Grove City. I go to a church with numerous students, Bible studies with students, and I love one aspect of the education here where our students get to see all aspects of our lives. So I look forward to chatting with you more this evening about higher education.
Oh, Kim, we're not picking up your audio. Hang on. Let's see. Is anyone else here? Okay. While Kim troubleshoots her audio, I'll say that if I'll put a little plug in. As I said, Kimberly works with the Classic Learning Test, and on the Scholar Academy website, if you go under some of our resources, you'll see a CLT tab, and Scholar Academy students get a discount on the CLT test. So that's just a little blurb for those of you who have, upper school students who are looking at potential admissions testing and so forth, that file that little nugget away. All right, how's it coming, Kimberly? Let's see. No? Anyone else hear her? I want to be sure. She's probably got multiple options. As you can tell, she's a real tech guru. So, let her sort through all that library of audio options there. Well, again, while she's sorting through, I'm going to tell you what to anticipate in the next segment of our evening, is that I will show 5 different questions. As I said, these 5 questions were told to our panelists in advance. And are each panelist going to speak to all 5 questions? No, we'd be here all evening. And as delightful as you are, I know some of you got food in the crock pot that you want to get to. So we're letting the panelists pick which question really struck their fancy and they feel like they have some inspiration and can speak into that. So that's what we've invited them to do. And then, like we said, at the end, we'll round out with Q&A from you. And I see there's already people dropping questions in the Q&A box. So that's great. We are definitely going to get to those. All right, Miss Farley, how are we doing?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
Victory.
Sorry. Occasionally it reverts to a different microphone and then you got to find that setting again. So thank you so much. It is a privilege and an honor to be here with you guys. CLT is just thrilled to partner with Classical Academic Press, and all of these gentlemen that are representing various organizations here. We are partners with all of these wonderful colleges, and we are just blessed by the connections that we make there. So I wanted to tell you, I think probably most of you know something about CLT. We are the Classic Learning Test. We started as an alternative to ACT, SAT. Now we are a test for 3rd through 12th graders. But we didn't want people who had this beautiful, rich, meaningful education to have to fit themselves into a box that said, I'm taking the same test that the public schoolers do, and it's based on their scope and sequence. So Classic Learning Test exists to reconnect knowledge and virtue by providing meaningful assessments and connections to seekers of truth, goodness, and beauty. That is our mission statement. We live it every day. And we love the students of Scholé, just like I think all of our panelists here would say that we would desire to have more of these homeschool students as part of the population that calls us home. So, I mean, I could tell you things about the test, about, the beautiful passages you'll encounter, the fun problem solving you'll see on the math instead of just rote equation solving. But I thought you might be more interested in who CLT is. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about that because I think you see that reflected in our tests as well as how we interact with our students who use us. So I did share our mission statement already, but I wanted to tell you there are 3 core values that we hold at CLT. And I want to tell a little bit about that. The first one is that we are anchored, meaning that we are anchored in the tradition. We are anchored in who we are and how we got here. That doesn't mean that we're not also exploring new technology and new way to make things better and easier, but it means that we're not losing our way because we know who we are, what shaped us, what formed us, and how we're going to proceed from here. And remaining anchored in the past and in the great thinkers, and that allows us to continue to grow and develop new things without losing our way and our vision. We are also passionate. You will meet a very passionate crew of folks at CLT who love education, but we love education in the good, the true, and the beautiful. It doesn't have to look like what most of America says education is. Matter of fact, we think that's probably not true education at all. We believe education to be human formation. And so we are passionate about seeing more students get the kind of education that will actually shape them and into humans that will give back to their community, that will really be world shapers and changers because they will start with self-governance. They will start with what they can do within their own families and their homes and their communities. And so that's what we are about. We are very passionate about making sure that this education is available to many, many students, all who would like to access it, and that they have a way to show this beautiful education by taking an assessment that matches it. Finally, we are humane. Now, that sounds like a really unusual core value for a testing company, right? Like, how did you land on humane? So I think part of it is when we thought about what we didn't like at times about the way that students were treated, we saw that, they're often a means to an end, or, or it's just get as many through the door as you can without caring about who they are and about seeing them as individual souls that would go on to do things in their lives. So we, one, value the humaneness of all of our students, and that when you interact with CLT, you will talk to a real person. Like, we care, we invest in our customer service and the way that we serve. But we also care about you and in the way that we write our tests. Our tests believe that you should have something valuable in front of you, that it is not just like, let's throw something up there and put some kind of tricky questions in there to see who can get them right. Like, we are looking at our assessment as also a way to uphold your humanity and make sure that we are worthy of your time. So that's who we are at CLT. Always come check us out, cltexam.com. I'd be happy to show you, how CLT can help you land at any of these great institutions, because I think most of these folks would tell you it's a great measure of how you're going to perform once you get on campus. But I wanted to also talk to you just a little bit about how I got here. So I am a homeschooling mom of 3. My kids have all graduated now. They've all gone to amazing partner colleges from CLT, these beautiful Christian liberal arts schools. And my oldest son is now at law school, and he's at an elite law school. And he used to tell me, like, when I would say to him, I think it's really bad in some of these schools, some of the colleges, I see what's going on. Like, I'm hearing these news stories. And while he was in this beautiful liberal arts Christian community, he would say to me, I think that's overblown. I don't think it could possibly be as bad as what you're telling me it is. And he is now at this elite law school. And he said to me not too long ago, he's like, it's far worse than I ever could have imagined. I cannot explain to you just how bad it is and how devoid of reason and logic the conclusions that people come to are. And he said, I'm a little frightened for the future of the law profession and any profession going forward if this is the status of our elite law school students. And so just having that experience, I was like, okay, well, so maybe we did do the right thing, right? In pursuing Christian liberal arts education. Of course, I knew that because I was seeing the fruit. But I thought one of the things that really came to me, we chose homeschooling, not because we were like, this would be a great idea. Let us do this really hard thing because it sounds fun. We chose homeschooling because the Lord laid it on our hearts, and perhaps a little bit of the kicking and screaming got pulled into it just in a desire to follow God's will. And so, yes, it was one of the hardest things I've done, one of the most joyful and blessed things I have ever done in my life. But it wasn't always easy. And we also gave up an income for us to be able to home educate. So as our kids were getting to those late middle school and early high school years, my husband and I had a lot of conversations where we said, we've chosen this beautiful education. We've been called to do this. It is in obedience to Christ that we are choosing this for our family. How are we going to pay for this education? And, and it was heavy on our hearts. Are we doing the right thing? And we knew we had to continue what we were doing, but we also knew that we were called to home education because we knew that what was being offered was not God's will for our family. And we didn't want to abandon those values where we said education is about human formation. It is about virtue. It is not simply about this utilitarian focus of career readiness. That is not what education is, whether you're in kindergarten or whether you're a senior in college. It is always about human formation. Now, along the way, they're also going to get some great skills that are going to equip them to be able to earn a living. That's great. We all want them earning a living and supporting themselves and putting a roof over their heads, but the two are not exclusive. They can have human formation, they can have spiritual growth while also developing great skills that are going to enable them to thrive as adults. But it was scary to think, how are we on one income investing in home education now going to pay for this? And so I want to encourage you. We are now, let's see, we've got one in law school, one that's a senior in college, one that's a sophomore in college. God has provided. And I don't mean that just to say like, oh yeah, just pray and the rich uncle's going to die. It's not that. We worked our tails off, quite frankly. We searched every scholarship option. We made sure that our kids were well prepared. They did everything that they could, and they work. And our children still work, and they can absolutely work and go to college at the same time. I think it makes them better time managers. They can contribute to their college. Matter of fact, my sophomore in college the other day told me, he said, I think even if I could just write a check for the whole tuition, when I have kids, I'm going to make them help pay for college because it's more valuable. And I've learned a lot about money management, and you're requiring that of me. And so I think it is possible. You may have to do a little legwork. It's not as easy as filling out the form and going to the community college down the road that may be free in your state, but it is absolutely worth it. And what my kids are gaining from it is immeasurable. Finally, I want to just end with this little encouragement. I walked in, my oldest son was a senior graduating from college. My youngest son was heading into his senior year of high school. And I walked in on a conversation that the two were having. And he said to my older son, said to my younger, where are you considering going to school? And he was rattling off his list of places that he was applying. And my older son said to him, you're not considering any state schools, are you? And he said, no. And he said, good. He said, I am who I am today because of the education that I received and the professors that I had and the way that they poured into me. He said, I know, and my youngest one's really technical. He's going into STEM, right? It's a little harder to find sometimes at a Christian liberal arts school. But he said to him, he said, it is worth it. You need to go someplace where you're going to be encouraged in your faith and shaped in your thinking. And I just want to tell you, don't ever consider the other, because you will not regret choosing a Christian liberal arts school. So not to bash public colleges in any way, but just to say, these are your priorities in choosing homeschooling. I encourage you to carry those through all the way through their education and know that it is possible to do it affordably. No rich uncle had to die, and we still got our kids through college.
Wow, what a rich exhortation. I feel like everybody probably now wants Kim Farley on their staff. Thank you for that beautiful exhortation to all of us as a mama for myself, and one who has most of my kids in college, but still one that we're still deciding. I can attest to that the formative impact that the professors, the college program that is chosen, and all of mine went to Christian liberal arts schools. And so it's been something we've never regretted. Now we move to the time in our evening when our panelists get to select a question. I'm going to display the questions, and just for time's sake and just as a way to poll the audience and to see participants, you there behind the screens, as you see these questions, feel free to drop in the chat the number of the question that you're particularly interested in. We chose these questions because we believe that they are in your interest to hear the content and the responses to, but we would love to just hear from you in real time. If there is one of these in particular that you're really wanting to, that you're really wanting us to make sure we cover. So where did my questions go? There we go. So I will read through them once, and then we'd love to hear, this is the popcorn style, our panelists, just which one they want to tackle. So number one, given society's focus on practical job skills, as well as rising inflation and costs of college, what version of college, if any, is worth pursuing? We may have already answered that this evening, but feel free to add additional insights. Number two, how should families think about their investment of resources when considering higher education? Do you have any practical tips for how to invest resources of various sorts? Number three, what makes for a successful college student from your vantage point? Professors, leaders, college presidents, homeschool mom, any from any of those vantage points. And then if you have any thoughts on a successful parent of a college student. Number four, from your observation, how do incoming classically educated students distinguish themselves from other students? This could be positively or negatively. And do you have any comments about homeschooled students in particular? So maybe particularly juicy to chew on. And if you could pick one book that incoming freshmen should read the summer prior to their first semester, what is it and why? I'm going to ask any of our, participants, if you want to vote on which one you're most interested in hearing, feel free to put a number of the question in the chat. But otherwise, I'm going to say, do any of our panelists feel a particular itch to speak to question one? I'll invite that first.
I'm willing to offer a couple of thoughts on question number one, and then other people can jump in. First of all, I think it's important to say that all of us, the panelists and obviously the parents involved on this webinar, are committed in one way or another to a classical liberal arts approach to education, right? So I think we share a lot of the same fundamental assumptions about what education is. That said, I don't think that the same kind of school or homeschooling or even college is right for everybody. So while we're obviously advocating for this approach to education, I do think there are a variety of situations and would want to talk with everybody individually, right? In terms of where you're at and what your child has done and where they're wanting to go and all those kinds of things. Okay, but given that, let me just throw out a couple of statistics. What has happened is that we now have a system in which many people are thinking of college education in purely utilitarian terms as a commodity, right? This is a thing, I'm going to invest X dollars to get this degree, which will enable me to have Y job to make Z amount of money, and that's it. Now, here's the kind of silly thing about that approach. Well, first of all, it runs contrary to thousands of years of philosophy of education and the practice of education. But even if you don't care about history, just in terms of where we're at right now as a society, across the United States, about 75, sometimes the statistic is as high as 80%, 75 to 80% of college graduates are going into jobs and careers that are not related to their major. And that is true in STEM fields also, okay? So if you add on to that the number of students who enter as freshmen and then change their major, okay, which the numbers vary, but statistically it's somewhere around 80%. What you have is a ridiculously low percentage of students who, as 18-year-olds, know what career they're going to end up in. Okay. So just from all the philosophical issues aside, in terms of, the nature of education and human person formation, like, it doesn't make sense to think of education as a means to an occupational end. Just statistically, that's a bad bet. Okay. Now I'll let other people go from there. But the other thing I would just add very quickly is that regardless of what job you end up having or what role in society you end up playing or whatever, kind of those kinds of things, the human being formation that happens through a liberal arts approach to education is so formative, right? So I love W.E.B. Du Bois's line where he says, the task of education, I insist that the true task of all education is not to make men carpenters, it is to make carpenters men, right? In other words, we need engineers and stay-at-home parents and teachers and pastors and bank workers and post office delivery. We need all these people in society. We need them to be human beings, right? And to be living virtuously and well. And ultimately, when you think about your child, I would suspect that when you think of where your child is 20 years or 30 years or 40 or 50 years down the road, what you care about is more the kind of person they are, the kind of parent, grandparent, contributor to their society, member of their church, all those kind of things, than what their salary is, right? What they submit, on their 1040 to the IRS every year. And so, like, education is this approach to education, to a liberal arts approach to education, is precisely geared toward those goals that I think many of us as parents share.
Yeah, I'd like to, I want to agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Diener, and I think that he's touching on both numbers 1 and 2, and that we have found the same thing. It's not very difficult to find that research put out by the U.S. Department of Education, in fact, that shows how few graduates actually have a career in any area directly related to their major. And what do you do with that information if you're a parent and you're thinking about, or if you're a high school student, you're thinking about college, and someone tells you, I know you're really excited about being an architect or an artist or a nurse or whatever it might be, but let me tell you, you got a 7% chance of being a nurse or an architect or an artist if you go study that in college. I struggle with that. I struggle with that information myself, because most people are going to think, well, maybe they're the exception. They're really driven, and you want to be that student who's driven and who's the exception. So I just want to give kind of 2 pieces of practical advice based on that information. One is this. One is, and I don't speak for my fellow panelists here. This is my opinion. I don't think there's any good reason to go into debt at all to go to college, period. That's my advice. Don't go into debt at all for college, period. This is based partly on the fact that a lot of universities are simply not worth it. And what a lot of homeschool families do is go to community college and then transfer to a state school and pay a fraction of the cost that other people do. And honestly, their education is as good or almost as good as the person who spends 40 grand to go to whatever random private university. Don't go into debt, period. There are every year innovations happening, especially in Christian higher education, to make the cost low, either through schools like Hildegard and others like us that just begin with a low cost, or through programs maybe like Baylor that are able to supplement the cost through scholarships. And if you're looking for scholarships, don't go, in my opinion, don't go unless the scholarships amount to enough that you don't have to go into any debt. I just don't think you need to. Happy to talk to people about that offline if they're interested. And then the second thing is, don't believe the career promises universities make. And there's a lot to say about this. I'll only say one thing, is that if you look even deeper into the research of return on investment for college, And if you look deep into the work done on what sorts of majors and schools and college decisions lead to meaningful careers, there's one, there are two things that matter. The first is the biggest predictor of success after college is what kind of student you were in college. Not the major, not the name brand of the school, not anything other than what kind of student you were in college. And so look at what kind of student a school forces their students to be. And then secondly, there's a direct correlation between the strength of a school to launch its students into the world through meaningful work and calling, and the relationship that university or college draws between the liberal arts and professional training or professional development. Usually this takes the form of schools have a higher return on investment. The graduates have a higher return on investment if they invest in the liberal arts. So you can look at major universities that have great books programs and look at statistics about the graduates who do their great books programs versus the ones that don't. Or you can look at schools that cannibalize the liberal arts for the sake of pushing students through professional majors and see that doesn't work very well in the practical ways. It doesn't help them have meaningful careers or jobs. And I would say the best of these are schools that know that one of the jobs of universities and colleges these days is to help students find a career. Even if it's by studying the liberal arts, it's still our obligation as colleges and leaders to help students find their calling. And that's what families look for. So make sure that a school has a good answer to that question. If it looks like the classes your kid's going to take are irrelevant, then it means they are irrelevant. I'll sort of end with that.
I agree entirely with everything that Dr. Smith and Dr. Diener have said. That's all I have to say on question 1 or 2.
Well, in the chat, there were a number of different votes for all sorts of things. So it looks like all the questions are of interest, but definitely we're getting votes for number 3 as well. So does anyone have anything particularly related to number 3 that you'd like to chime in about?
I'd formed an answer to number 4 that was sort of also includes 3. These are obviously the ways in which students are well prepared if they come from a classical background, but also this would apply to students in general. But I find in my experience, students who come from a classically formed background will be still interested in learning, actually, which is not to be taken for granted. And they also usually have strong skills in analysis, written composition, and verbal expression. And there's also another element that some of them may or may not have, but I'll come back to that. But I first would say that in contrast to, say, students in my experience, and I've had students go through both public schools and through classical schools and homeschool in classical tradition. I would say that by the time they finish, say, in a classical curriculum, I'd say about 30 to 40% of students are still actually interested in learning, which is compared to like public school, it might be like 2 to 5% in my experience. So the odds are much better. But what this does is actually shows that there's still 60 to 70% are still sort of thinking of both themselves and their education as in strictly instrumental terms, which both Dr. Smith and Dr. Diener have already kind of described in some ways. I think that's the deep cultural force, is that the assumption that education is reducible to information and job skills ends up making people instrumentalize themselves as money-making machines, right? And that's the vision of education that they often, even in a classically formed kind of education, can fall into. And I think that's the thing to be careful about, so that they can end up missing the opportunity to be introduced to practical wisdom questions, which is really the core of what's being offered there. The second thing I would say in terms of the students often having an ability to communicate in writing or verbally, as well as do analysis. Many students with a classical background will be strong in that area. The difficulty sometimes is that they've they mistake a foundation for the whole building, and they don't realize like they've got a good foundation that they can build on, but they still need to build on it, and they haven't finished the building, right? So that's one of the challenges. And this leads, I think, to the other crucial point is that how well students will learn will depend on the attitude that they've internalized from what they think really learning really is. Basically, if students think of education as skills and information, they're going to think of it as a commodity, and they're not going to be motivated to internally to learn, right? And the difficulty is that a student can be given what is technically a classical education, but nevertheless actually pick up an attitude that treats learning in this way. So I think the thing to think about is, to ask yourself, have you been taught as a student to approach your education as an introduction to an apprenticeship and the great conversation about the most important wisdom questions that you face? Or actually, have you been led to believe that, for example, once you've read the Divine Comedy or Plato's Republic, you're done with that and you can move on to the next thing, right? So if your attitude's more like the latter, you might in fact be being inoculated against the wisdom-seeking education, right? So I think that's the thing to be careful about. And so I think one of the best books that you can read to transition to the other question is C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man. I think it's important because it explains actually two things that are equally important. One is it shows that human beings have a need to understand actually value and worth are not simply subjective. So it's helpful as an antidote against kind of relativism more broadly. But at the same time, Lewis's book also shows why the very notion of, in fact, moral virtue can never be reducible to knowledge, but always consists of an ordering of affections in the right way. In short, the book reminds us that an education is incomplete if it doesn't actually account for the way that what you love connects what you know and how you live. But I'm sure that Dr. Franklin can fill us in more on all of that. But that would be the answers to the last two questions I would offer.
Dr. Franklin, which questions would you like to address?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really agree with Dr. Donnelly and a lot of what he had to say, and was thinking about a lot of the same things. So maybe trying to pivot a little bit just to add, particularly to question 3 of what a student might do to prepare. I guess a couple of things come to mind. One would be discernment, and I think this is really what Dr. Donnelly was speaking to at the end. There's going to be a lot of voices telling you what education is for and what it's about. And I think one of the most difficult things to do is to form a good grasp of what education is for and then learn how to retain it. So to some degree, I think for us Christians, this is universal and pretty clear. Education is formation in Christ likeness. And that's something we should all be aiming at, developing well-rounded talents and skills to serve the kingdom of God. And I don't say that lightly. We need to keep that at the forefront of our mind and be thinking in all that we're doing in education and what ways are we fulfilling that, which really is our ultimate and primary vocation for all of us. But also, as you think about your vision, there's going to be some things that are more personal for you. So for example, what are some things that you are particularly weak in? I have students who regularly take logic and say, I'm no good at this, I should probably drop it, in which I say, that's exactly why you should take it. Logic is something that all humans need. And if it's not something you're good at, that's precisely something to lean into and learn to develop. So as you think about your time in education, you might say, what seemed to me to be some really important, just generic human skills that I need to thrive as a person, and bring that into your vision of what you should be doing in your 4 years of education, or what might be some major vocational specifics. So I'd really encourage you, sit down with your mom and dad, sit down with a mentor at church, maybe your freshman advisor when you get to college, and work on forming a vision for what education is and learning to hold on to that in your 4 years while you're here. A second thing I'd want to emphasize is community. Community is so central. Wherever you end up, find a church, be involved in that church, serve at that church. Serving, we always find time to say, hey, this isn't the time. I've got whatever. I'm in college. I'm in grad school. I'm a young father. These are things I might have always said to myself. There's never an easy time to serve. But when you get to college, it's very disorienting for a lot of us. And what will orient you is service in the church. The church needs young men and women. I've got students who are in Sunday school loving on my kids. It is wonderful to see the kind of lasting impact they have. So when you get to college, find community in the local church. Secondly, when you think about friendships, form rich friendships, people who you can play together with, laugh together with, study, and partner in what you're up to in these 4 years. Last thing I would say is you're going to need self-discipline. For a lot of you, there'll be more freedom, less external constraints than you've ever experienced. And you don't want to think of self-discipline as a bad thing. Self-discipline is what will enable you to enjoy the best things the most. So you're going to need to know about yourself. When do you work well? And I promise you, it's not at 2 a.m. So when do you work best? What kinds of conditions do you work best under? You're going to need to think about how you rest. How do you give your body rest? How do you give your soul rest? So it's going to take a bit of self-knowledge. And I think your first semester freshman, it's going to be bumpy. Welcome to the club. Don't despair at that and just say, hey, I'm learning what it's like to acclimate. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning a good discipline regimen. And within that, you're going to need to learn the art of saying no. I know many people very old like me who are harried and busy and have never learned the art of saying no. So there's lots of good things at college, but you're going to tend to be overcommitted. Avoid that. Learn the art of being balanced, living within the margins, and giving yourself room for rest and leisure, even in the busy time of college.
Thank you for all of those nuggets of wisdom. Participants, you've already dropped some things in the Q&A, and we want to invite more. We still have approximately 15 minutes remaining. We'll go until 15 past the hour. So we do want to allow for our panelists to answer your questions. And I would just say, and I also invite Miss Sarah Marshall, who's been in the background kind of moderating some things. Feel free, if I miss anything, Sarah, feel free to chime in. But we did have one for Dr. Donnelly in particular, and I think someone else mentioned something about Hildegard earlier. So Dr. Smith, be on your toes there, it may be coming at you. But Dr. Donnelly, the question is, what additional academic requirements should honors students expect? Is a Christian liberal arts pursuit only available within the Honors College?
Thanks. That's a good question. I would say that in principle, you can, to answer the second question first, you can get a Christian liberal arts education in other places at Baylor, obviously, but it would just require being a bit more intentional. But what happens in the Honors College in particular is a community that's shared purpose with respect to those priorities. In terms of the additional academic requirements, I mentioned there's 4 programs actually that are inside the college. And just to confuse things, one of them is called the Honors Program. So it's like a castle with 4 towers, and one of them is called the Castle Tower. That's how I describe it. So the Honors Program does require a thesis and as well as a set of couple of courses in great texts, as well as, but you can be combined with any major in the university. So you want to do biochemistry, you can do it in the honors program. There are other programs. There is also the great text program, which is a major that you can combine with other majors as well. There's a university scholars program, which is also does a thesis like the honors program, and but it's more of a flexible make your own major. But you develop concentration, so you have to have substantive areas, but it's more flexible. And then there's an alternative general education core called the BIC, or Baylor Interdisciplinary Core Program, which is also that's the 4th program. So any one of those programs, if you're in any one, you're in the Honors College. So that's the short answer. More information is available on the website there. And feel free to email me if you have further questions about the various programs in the college.
Great. Okay, now we're going to do a little embodied learning. Okay, one of the questions is co-ed or not co-ed. So if you are a single gender school, please hold up a 1. If you are a co-ed school, hold up a 2 from our panelists. Are you a co-ed school? A 2. If you're a single gender. So the answer to that one is they're all co-ed. The next one is, this is for everybody to think about. most popular major at your school? Of course, you don't have the stats probably readily available, but just your instinct, what you've heard and seen, top 1, 2 majors at your school.
At Hillsdale, it's English and history, but students are spread across all the majors.
I don't actually know what the largest majors are, but I would assume at Baylor there's a large pre-med contingent as well as a large business school contingent. But in the honors college, I'd say university scholars and the honors program make up the bulk of the students there. But
Ours is obviously liberal arts and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I also don't have exactly the stats. I know we have different schools here at Grove City College and the Calderwood School of Arts and Letters. The top 2 majors I know are business and English, but what happens also when you bring STEM in, I'm not sure how that affects it.
Next question is very fascinating, and Kim, this may be even something you want to chime in, but this is just in general. It's a case study. You have a student who is very academically sound, scoring in the 90th percentile on standardized testing, solid academically, maybe interpersonally, emotionally, or socially less mature, seeming less ready. Would you recommend waiting 1 more year? I'm hearing gap year in the question. And how might, if they did wait 1 additional year, how might that affect the application for acceptance? Any thoughts on that from anybody?
I will answer that one. Absolutely have your student wait. Do not send them to college when they are not ready to be living independently, because it is so much about what they do while they are there. And there are going to be a lot of temptations along the way, and that self-discipline is key to whether they actually utilize that first year in a really productive way or not. So I would say, by all means, you want to equip your students to the best of your ability to launch them successfully, because once they go to college, they are adults. They should be doing all their own communication, their own time management, all of those things. So it's discouraging to me sometimes how much a bad first year can derail a student's future if they decide later on that they really want to go the grad school route or they want to go for advanced degrees. That first year can really impact them if they are not set up for success from the get-go. So what does that year look like? I think it really depends on your student. I would encourage you, just make it productive. It could be full-time work. It could be apprenticeship. It could be going into a gap year program where there's a discipleship component and they actually go into a 1-year discipleship program. It could be serving in some way, mostly volunteer while also earning money at the same time. From all of my interactions with admissions offices, they actually like gap years as long as they are productive gap years. And you have something to show at the end of that time to say, I have a story, and here's why I am now ready to engage and be a member of the community at the college where I've applied. How to technically manage it really depends on the college. There's 2 different routes. Sometimes you want to apply and have them defer their admission. And so some colleges want you to go that route. Other colleges will say, just wait, it's fine. We're happy to have a gap year. You apply 1 year later, you have all your transcript and everything ready. Your essays may actually be focused on what you did during that gap year. There's some explanation of why there's a gap. But I would say look at colleges that may be of interest and find out from them which is the route that they would prefer. But please, I think it is a very wise decision to be considering whether academic readiness alone is a deciding factor in whether your student should attend college right now.
If I could just add on to that as well, I took a gap semester. I would have taken a gap year, but my dad didn't let me. But I've had students who have done this, and of course, like anything, you can do it wrong and you can do it well, but without kind of bearing my whole soul of what went into this, I'll say taking that gap time made me so hungry and excited to go back to college. And I regularly see this with students. I think it does often bring, depending on what they were up to, but for some students, this is working to prepare to help with college debt and things like this. Often there is just a kind of maturity there, but I'll say, especially, I think what there is just a kind of recognition of what a delight it is to be in a community of learners devoted to this full time. And when you've been doing this pretty much your whole life, I mean, we don't remember much before doing something like this. It's easy just to think, this is just, like what everybody does. And you go out and you think, wow, what people call the real world is not so real. And what people are up to in education has a lot more depth and kind of richness to it. So again, you have to think about lots of things to say here, but I would just say there's lots of benefits from doing something like that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Kimberly and Christopher. I think a gap year is a really, really good idea. Even if you're a student, if you're a student or if your child is relatively mature, we actively seek out gap year applicants at Hildegard. In fact, so much so that we offer what we call a bridge year. Bridge sounds like you're not falling into a gap, so it's sometimes the preferred nomenclature. A bridge year that doubles as our freshman year. So students that want to can actually come to Hildegard College and do the first year curriculum, which is the first of 4 years, but also in some ways is a coherent standalone year. They can get accredited college credit for it and then transfer somewhere else after a sort of bridge year experience at Hildegard, or they can continue on as sophomores at Hildegard. So we're such a big fan of what we've seen in gap year or bridge year applicants that we just decided to make one ourselves.
Yes.
Dr. Donnelly, your amen section is fabulous. We're rounding out the evening, and there's one other question that's kind of coming through, and I think it's a great segue to kind of wrap up what we've been saying, is that obviously the colleges that are represented here are Christian liberal arts. So obviously that's what we're excited about and passionate about. Our lives are invested in these things, but that doesn't mean that any one of these dads or mamas or anything feel that it is prescriptive for every human being. And I think that was even said, but I want to say to you families who, for whatever reason, you need to choose a state school, or you've chosen to choose a state school, or you've chosen college isn't the right route, or you've chosen go with God, go with our blessing, that there is a whole array of human experience that that the Lord affirms and blesses. And kind of just piggybacking on what Dr. Franklin has said, that our focus is on Him. And he has given all kinds of strange, fascinating, and interesting instructions to his people throughout the year. So there isn't, a one size fits all to any of this. Now, having said that, I'll say that there's some questions about, we love the liberal arts, we believe in them, but what about STEM? Because it's not me that's pushing it, it's actually my kid. My child is really interested in STEM, and my child has this aptitude for, technical things and so forth. And I've heard a lot of our panelists talk about what we at Schola Academy call the common arts, and the integration of the ability to use, the common arts, the liberal arts, and the fine arts as a more holistic picture of human development. So the question is then, if they're more interested in STEM and architecture and things like this, would a Christian liberal arts college still be a place for them? Would it help them to prioritize things? Would it be good for them? Or is there another options that you would recommend? So in this last bit, feel free, panelists, thank you for already typing in answers as you see them come in, but do you have any recommendations for those who may fall outside the standard bounds of, I'm in it for the liberal arts? Is there other things that our families can be considering, and words that you'd want to pass on?
I'll speak very, very briefly to that. I would advise somebody who's interested in STEM in a very focused way to do one of two things. I would advise them to go to a comprehensive university that has a really good program in that area, providing that it also has a strong integrated arts and humanities core. like a great books program. So you can almost divide the Christian universities in the country into two groups: the big Christian universities, those that really actually have doubled down on putting the liberal arts at the center of general education, and those that have not. And it's pretty easy to see which are which. Otherwise, and I don't know if others would agree with me or not, this might be controversial, I would suggest completely foregoing the idea that college should be for formation personally and spiritually, and treating it only as career training. Try to get into Caltech, try to get into MIT, or whatever engineering school. And if you go in with this idea that it's not for formation, and then buttress your experience through a robust church community and other things, I think that can be not an ideal option, because it's the world we live in. But I would rather my own children, for instance, interested in STEM, do that than go to a mediocre STEM program at a mediocre Christian school.
I actually have a STEM student. My sophomore in college is a computer science guy. He is actually at Grove City College. And the reason that he chose Grove City is because they had this incredibly robust STEM program with top-notch professors who had excelled in their professional fields, but loved to teach. Because it's not the grad assistant that's teaching their classes, it's actually the professor who built AI for Google that is teaching my son. And so he is thriving and loving it and being challenged. And so it's all of those things, but he also had to take ethics, faith, and the conscious mind to understand what the implications of AI are and where we should draw that line. And so there's a lot of ethics and philosophy woven into everything on every level, even within the STEM program at some place like Grove City. Now, there may be a lot of other options. That was kind of what he zeroed in on early on, but for him, he is absolutely thriving there, and it was a perfect fit. So there are some Christian liberal arts schools that do STEM very well, and I would just encourage you, if that's something, because I think it is hard. It's hard for our kids to hold that line sometimes. They are going to be challenged in many ways, not just academically, but socially, emotionally, morally. And so having a light community has been a real blessing.
Can I throw out one other resource? I completely agree with what Kimberly just said, that you don't have to think of this as a false dichotomy. If your child is going or looking at various big state schools, one resource that might be helpful is the ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, does rankings. And one of the things that they look at is not only college, they study college curriculums, and you could look at it and see if you think it's helpful, but they also have works to try to identify individual professors or programs within bigger universities that might be aligned. So you might not know, like, oh, if I go to this huge state university, there's actually this small group of professors or a couple people in a field I'm really interested in that are very much aligned with this, classical liberal arts approach to education. And so that can be a beneficial resource also.
Mrs. Farley beat me to the punch, but just to highlight what she said, whether this is Grove City or another Christian liberal arts STEM school, have two reasons you might still be thinking about why a Christian liberal arts school if my student is going into STEM. I think there's two things to think about. One, if it's a Christian liberal arts school, it's probably going to have a much stronger general education program than other kinds of schools. For a lot of schools, general education has just become a grab bag of student choice that doesn't build any kind of coherent understanding of what the world is, or coherent direction and development of good loves, properly ordered loves. And so at a Christian liberal arts school, they're going to have to take a general education curriculum that will really help round them up. A second thing, and I think this is probably the most important thing Mrs. Farley was emphasizing, is this also affects how STEM's taught here. There's ways of teaching STEM that's very humane. And we don't have to think about these things as at odds. For example, we've got a conservation biologist here, and we have a Wendy Berry scholar here, and they regularly co-teach a class for the biology majors as they want to think about a variety of these kinds of issues. Our chair of the electrical engineering and that Formation Friday thing I mentioned regularly teaches Augustine's Confessions. So there's just a lovely connection between what we're up to and what's considered the traditional liberal arts, or say the humanities, and what's going on in STEM. And we very much think of it as a two-way street where we're both learning and developing and collaborating together to help give your students a very well-rounded education.
That all sounds right to me as far as the connections we make. Similar at Baylor, I have friendships with colleagues in mechanical and electrical engineering, and their students. I teach often whole sections of engineering students because great text courses are part of their core requirements. So in the School of Engineering, Computer Science in particular, if they're interested in that area of STEM studies, we have also a number of students if they're interested in the biomedical sciences. Baylor, I'd say about half of our university scholars, in fact, are pre-med students, and they all do very well, as well as getting that kind of formation, seeing how it's part of a conversation about what they're becoming as Christian scholars and medical practitioners or technical workers as well. So again, my answer is yes.
Well, it has been such a rich evening. I really do want to thank each one of you panelists for being with us. I have personally benefited from soaking up your insights, your perspectives, the drums you want to beat, all of that. Like, we take it in. It's great for us to really wrestle with and think through. And I think all of us, parents, students alike, will go away with things to wrestle with. And that's the beautiful thing about the formation that we're all trying to participate in as human beings, is wrestling with it to ultimately, come to truth and goodness and beauty. So thank you so much for your time with us this evening. I think we'll end, if you don't mind, we will round out with just praying a psalm together. I think it's just a good way for us to corporately attest to shared value, shared truth that we all agree on. And what we'll do is I will just read the unbolded lines, and then I'll ask our panelists, if you don't mind, if you'll kind of lead the rest, and wherever you are in your home and wherever you're leading, and if you've already started dipping into the crock pot or whatever you are doing right now, we just invite you to participate with us in this responsive prayer. I will begin.
We
May God
unmute.
be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine upon us.
That your way may be known on
earth, your saving power
Saving
among all
power
nations.
among all nations.
Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let the peoples praise you.
Let the
Nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide the nations upon earth.
Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let the peoples praise you.
The earth has yielded its increase. God, our God, shall bless us.
God shall bless us. Let all the ends of the earth fear him. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, wherever you were joining us from. Thank you so much to our panelists and all our participants. We wish you God's great favor as you think through these ideas and make wise and responsible decisions for your family. We love you, and good night.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night. God bless everybody.